938 Live.
It's 9 o'clock. Good morning. The news on 938 Live. I'm Justine Moss. 10 years after a powerful tsunami swept thousands to their deaths along the shorelines of the Indian Ocean, Rick von Feldt says he's still afraid to sleep near a beach. That is until 2 weeks ago when he rented a cabin on the beach as his way of commemorating the 10th anniversary of the disaster. Well, the American, who was working in Singapore at that time, was in Phuket that fateful day. Rick now lives in Sydney and he joins us live to talk about his experience. Good morning, Rick.
Good morning.
Talk about what happened to you 10 years ago.
Well, like many people, on Boxing Day, I had decided that it was time to take a bit of a trip outside of Singapore and take a bit of a holiday. And so one very early flight, leaving at Singapore about 7 in the morning, headed towards Phuket. While on that flight, as some people may remember, there was an earthquake in the Indian Ocean that was at 9.3 on the Richter scale. But that happened while I was in the air, so I had no idea that this large earthquake had happened or that it may cause consequences afterwards. And I landed in Phuket at about 8 o'clock in the morning, jumped into a taxi and headed for my hotel, which was down on the beach of Patong Bay. But as we entered the 10-long block section of Patong Bay, all traffic had stopped. And as we looked out to the water side along the water wall, it was a surprising experience because normally where the large amount of water is in Patong Bay, the bay had completely emptied out. There was no more water.
Gosh.
And so it was a surprising kind of odd moment for people. I mean, locals had run out and run onto the ocean floor because they had never seen the bottom of the bay. Many tourists were out 8:30 in the morning, especially families, unfortunately, because it was early in the morning and a lot of families decided that's the best time to get out, in the sun. And so there were tons of families that had staked their place on the beach. And the bay was gone, so everybody was sort of in confusion. The traffic had stopped. My taxi driver got out of his taxi and went to stand on the boardwalk there to look out, and so did I, because that's what everybody was doing. For me, I was sort of confused. I didn't quite understand what was happening. To me, I thought, wow, this is probably one of the lowest tides ever. I just didn't, like so many people in our lifetime, we had never seen a tsunami. And, there hadn't been a tsunami in recorded history in that part of Thailand for over 100 years, so nobody living had ever seen such a thing. And so it was just sort of confusion. And then all of a sudden, my taxi driver, his mobile phone rang, and he said something to the person on the phone and instantly turned and ran towards the taxi. My things were in the taxi with him, so I was running with him wherever he was going, and I was getting in that taxi. We jumped into the cab, and he turned his taxi up onto the sidewalk itself and navigated slowly along where people were, because I was confused. I had no idea where we were going. I thought, again, it's all a very confusing thing. We got 4 blocks down to the end of the beach and up a small hill and stopped. Got out of the cab, turned around, and then we saw the wall of water that was coming. And the first of the waves came. It looked sort of like the tide was returning at first at a very fast rate. The first wave itself was not the most deadly of all of the waves. It was the second one. The first one came in, but it didn't stop at the sand level. It came up the boardwalk. It went about a foot over the road, and then very quickly stopped and instantly went back. So if you were on the beach and you couldn't get off of the beach, unfortunately that was the first wave. But then very quickly, after it went out, people were confused. They came out of their hotels. They were walking around. They thought, what in the heck just happened? But unbeknownst to them, it was the second wave that came in. That wave ended up being about 8 to 9 meters over the road, went up to the second story of all of the beachfront hotels in Phuket on Patong Bay, and that was the one that ultimately caused so much destruction and death.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Rick, you escaped the tsunami. Of course, you did witness death and destruction. Just talk a little quickly about how has that, what impact has that had on you?
Like so many people, there are obviously 230,000 people that died because of the tsunami, but there were, hundreds of thousands of more people that survived. For all of us, every survivor has to think about how do they process what they saw, how do they deal with what they did. For me, instantly I needed to tell the story. I wanted to tell the story about all of these people that I ran into within those 24 hours, about how they survived, what they did, what it caused to them and their families. And so very instantly I started collecting stories of survivors and writing them down and putting them onto a website that I have maintained for the last 10 years to celebrate the stories of all of the survivors of the tsunamis. Many of them are sad. Many of them sometimes are written by family members who lost loved ones or barely made it through the tsunami themselves. So for me personally, it's been my way of recovering, of dealing with what I saw, of making something out of such a tragic experience. And over the years, people have been able to use it to understand more. For me personally, though, it's taken time. As you mentioned at the beginning, for a while I couldn't go back to Phuket. I finally went back to Phuket, but I definitely had to stay in hotels that were very high for fear that, even though I love the ocean, it was a beautiful sunny day, you just didn't know it was coming. And I had decided that in honor of this 10-year anniversary, the thing that I wanted to do for myself was to be back on the ocean and to have the situation to sleep by the ocean overnight, because that's the most scary time when you're sleeping, like so many were that morning. They didn't even know what hit them because they were still in bed, and the wave came and they didn't even know it. And so that was sort of my 10-year moment to sort of say, okay, I did this, and I'm now, it's part of the recovery process.
Well, Rick, I really appreciate you speaking to us this morning on 938 Live.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Rick von Feldt, and he actually witnessed and was part of the terrible tsunami which happened 10 years ago today.